I want you to picture something with me. You're sitting at your kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. The coffee's still hot, the window's cracked open, birds are doing their thing outside, everything is quiet, everything feels ordinary. And then your phone buzzes. It's a text from your bank, a transaction alert, $62.47, at a place called GameStop. You squint at the screen. You think, okay, that's strange. I haven't been to a GameStop in my life. I'm 68 years old. I don't even own a gaming console. So you dismiss it. You figure it's a glitch. You put the phone down, take a sip of your coffee, and look back out the window. And that right there, that moment, is the biggest mistake I made in the entire story I'm about to tell you. Because that $62 charge wasn't a glitch. It wasn't fraud in the way I was thinking. It was my grandson. And the part that took my breath away, the part that still makes me sit very still when I think about it, is that it wasn't just him. His mother knew. Not only did she know, she had made it possible. And she had been doing it for longer than I ever imagined. By the time I found out the full truth, we weren't talking about $62 anymore. We were talking about a number that made my hands shake when I wrote it down. We were talking about a plan that had been running quietly, right underneath me, while I sat at that same kitchen table, thinking everything was fine. 48 hours after I got that text, my entire understanding of my family had changed. And I need to tell you, there are moments in this story that I'm still processing, even now, because it wasn't just about the money. It never really is, when it's family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before I do, if you've ever trusted someone completely and later found out they were a completely different person behind your back, then this story is going to hit differently for you. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the full truth took a long time to come out, and every part of it matters. If this is the kind of story you want to hear more of, hit subscribe and drop a like. It helps more than you know. All right, back to the beginning. My name is Martha. I'm 68. I spent 31 years as a middle school English teacher before I retired, and I've lived in the same house in Ohio since 1987. The one my late husband Harold and I picked out together. White siding, blue shutters, a porch I've probably spent 1,000 hours on by now. Harold passed 3 years ago. Heart attack. It was sudden, and the grief was the kind you don't fully get over. You just learn to carry differently. After Harold was gone, my son Robert checked in on me every Sunday. That was our arrangement. He'd bring his wife Donna and their son Tyler, and we'd have lunch, and it felt like something I could hold on to. Robert is 46. He works in logistics, long hours, always tired but never complaining. He's a good man, a quiet man. He married Donna about 20 years ago, and I'll be honest, Donna and I were never what you'd call close. We were polite, we were cordial at holidays, but there was always a distance there that I could never quite name. She was smart. That I'll give her. Very sharp, very organized, always on top of things. She handled everything in their household. The finances, the appointments, the planning. Robert trusted her completely with all of it, which isn't unusual, but looking back, it was important. And then there was Tyler. Tyler was 19 at the time all this started. He was attending community college locally, studying something in IT, which he'd been passionate about since he was about 12 years old. He was a charming kid, funny, the kind of person who could talk to anyone and make them feel comfortable. He'd come over for Sunday lunches and help me with my laptop when something wasn't working, and we'd joke around, and it felt easy. I adored that boy. I want you to understand that before I say anything else. I genuinely adored him. And that is exactly why what came next hurt so much. Now, about 18 months before any of this started, there was something that happened that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Donna had offered to help me set up online banking. I'd been doing everything by mail and phone, and she said it would be easier, more convenient, safer. She sat at this very table and walked me through the whole setup on my laptop. She helped me choose a password, she linked my checking account and my credit card, she showed me how to check my balance. She seemed patient and kind about it. I thanked her. I didn't think about it again. That right there, that afternoon at my kitchen table, was actually the moment that everything started. I just didn't know it yet. Okay, so let's go back to that Tuesday morning in March. The bank text, 6247, GameStop. Like I said, I dismissed it at first, but then, about 2 hours later, another text came in. This one was from a restaurant called Wing Zone. $38 and change. And then a third one, later that afternoon, a charge at some place I'd never heard of, online, $17. 3 charges in one day on a card I barely used. Now I was paying attention. I called the bank. Went through the whole process. They confirmed the charges were made, 2 of them in person using a physical card and 1 online. They asked if I had the card in my possession. I went to my purse and pulled out my wallet, and there it was, my Visa, right where it always was. The card had never left my possession. The woman on the phone said it was possible someone had cloned the card, or obtained the number some other way. She canceled the card, sent me a new one, and opened a fraud claim. I thanked her and hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long minute after that, holding the old card in my hand, just thinking, cloned, stolen number. Okay, that happened to people. It was unfortunate, but it happened. I put it out of my mind. The new card arrived about a week later. I activated it, put it in my wallet, and went on with my life. And then, 6 weeks later, the exact same thing happened again. This time the charges were different places, but the pattern was identical. Food, entertainment, something online. I called the bank again. They were confused. 2 fraud incidents in 2 months, same account. They asked me more pointed questions this time. Had I shared my card information with anyone? Had anyone had access to my account? Was I sure I hadn't made these purchases and forgotten? I told them no, and absolutely not. I was 68, not confused. They canceled that card too, opened another investigation, and I got off the phone feeling genuinely unsettled for the first time. Here's what was bothering me, and I couldn't fully articulate it yet, but the charges felt local. GameStop and Wing Zone weren't online abstract companies. They were places within a few miles of my house. They were places a young person who lived nearby might go. I almost said something to myself out loud. I almost said a name. But I stopped myself, because that felt like an accusation I wasn't ready to make. Not about Tyler. Not about my grandson. Instead, I called my neighbor Carol. Carol is 71, sharp as a tack, and she spent 22 years as an administrative manager for a law firm before she retired. She's the kind of person who notices details other people glaze over. We've been friends since our kids were in elementary school together, and there is nobody on earth whose judgment I trust more. I told her about the charges. I told her about the pattern. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Martha, what places specifically?" I read her the list. Another pause. "I've seen Tyler at Wing Zone," she said, "twice in the last month, with some of his friends." I felt the air change in the room. "Carol," I said. "I'm not accusing anyone," she said quickly. "I'm just telling you what I know." I thanked her and hung up, and then I sat down very slowly in my kitchen chair, and I thought about my grandson, and I thought about how he'd been at my house helping me set up a new streaming service about 2 months ago. And then I remembered something that stopped my heart a little. He had asked to see my credit card, to enter the number for a free trial. He said some services required a card on file even for a free account. I had handed it to him without a second thought. I didn't confront Tyler right away. I want to be honest about that. I sat on it for 4 days. 4 days of cooking meals I barely tasted, watching TV I wasn't following, sleeping restlessly and waking up at 3 in the morning with that low, humming anxiety you get when you know something, but you don't want to know it. On the 5th day, I called Robert and told him Tyler was stopping by on Saturday to help me with my garden. Robert didn't question it. He said Tyler could use the reminder to get outside. Tyler showed up on Saturday with his easy smile and his hoodie, and we spent about an hour planting some things out back. And then we came inside and I made us both lemonade and we sat at the kitchen table, and I looked at him for a long moment before I spoke. I said, "Tyler, honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." He tilted his head slightly. Something moved across his face, just for a second. Then the easy smile came back. "Of course, Grandma. What's up?" I slid a piece of paper across the table. I'd printed out the transaction history, all the flagged charges from the last 2 months. He looked at it, and I watched his expression very carefully. His jaw tightened, just slightly. His eyes moved across the page just a little too quickly for someone reading something unfamiliar. "What is this?" he said. "Those are charges on my credit card," I said. "Charges I didn't make." Silence. "Tyler." He set the paper down. He looked at the table, and then something shifted in him, and he looked up at me with eyes that were genuinely sorry. I believe that part. I still believe that part. And he said, "I'm so sorry, Grandma." Just like that. Quiet, no pretending. I felt the breath leave my body. "You took my card number," I said. I was going to pay it back. I had every intention. "How much?" He swallowed. "I don't know exactly." "Yes, you do." He looked at the table again. A few hundred. "Maybe 350? I kept telling myself I'd put it back before you noticed. $350. I sat back in my chair. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not rage, but a deep, hollow sadness. Because this was Tyler. This was the boy who used to fall asleep at the foot of my bed, watching movies on Christmas Eve. This was the kid I helped with his reading when he was 8 years old. I asked him why he hadn't just come to me if he needed money. He got quiet again. He said it was complicated. He said his mom would have been upset if she'd found out he was asking me for money. I paused on that. "Why would your mom be upset about that?" I said. He looked up quickly, like he'd said more than he meant to, and then he shook his head and said, "Never mind. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry. I'll pay you back every cent." But I couldn't let that go. Why would Donna be upset about Tyler asking me for money? That question stayed with me for the next week, sitting at the back of everything, refusing to be quiet. I should have been satisfied, he'd confessed. He was sorry. We had a number, we had a plan to repay it. But something wasn't right, and I hadn't been asking the right question. A week after my conversation with Tyler, I got a letter in the mail from my bank. A physical letter. It was a follow-up on my fraud claim. The letter confirmed that the fraud investigation had been closed. Charges had been attributed to a known user of the account based on device data and location patterns. Fine, that tracked. But there was one line at the bottom that I almost skipped over, and I'm so glad I didn't. The line said, "For a full summary of account activity, including online access history, please log into your account or contact a branch representative." Online access history. I didn't know the bank tracked that. I didn't know they logged every time someone logged into my account online, with timestamps and device information. I called the branch the next morning and asked a very patient young man named Chris to walk me through the last 12 months of online logins to my account. There were a lot of them. I maybe logged in 3 or 4 times a year. I barely used the online system. Chris read me the log. Between last March and this March, there had been 41 logins to my online banking account. 41. From devices and IP addresses that Chris flagged as inconsistent with my own pattern. A large cluster of them happened on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, with a handful on Saturday mornings. I felt a cold feeling move through me. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and Saturday mornings. That was when Tyler had class at the community college. Tuesday and Thursday evenings were his lab sessions. Saturday mornings were when he usually worked his part-time job at a tech retail store. So, whoever was logging into my account 41 times in 12 months was doing it from a different schedule than Tyler's. I called Carol. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time on the other end. When she spoke, her voice was very measured. She said, "Martha, who else set up your online banking?" The room went still. Donna. Donna had sat at my kitchen table, helped me create the account, chosen a password, and I'd let her, because I trusted her, because she was family, because she seemed like she was doing me a favor. But here was what I needed to figure out. If Donna had access to my online banking, what had she actually been doing with it? Because 41 logins over 12 months wasn't a grandmother checking her balance. That was someone managing something. Carol came over that evening. She brought a notepad. We sat at the kitchen table, same table where all of this started, and we went through everything I could pull up on my own account. 3 months of transaction history I could see on my end. Some of it made no sense to me. There were small transfers, $20 here, $30 there, moved to an external account I didn't recognize. They were small enough that I'd never flagged them. Small enough that I'd probably just assumed they were automatic charges I'd forgotten about. Carol circled each one. When we added them up just from the 3 months I could see, the number was just over $400. This is just the last 3 months, Carol said. I looked at her. If this has been going on for 12 months, or longer, she stopped. I finished the thought. How much are we actually talking about? I want to explain what it feels like to realize that someone has been inside your finances without your knowledge. It's not like anything I can fully describe. It's not just anger, though the anger comes. It's something more disorienting than that. It's like walking into a room in your own house and realizing that someone else has been rearranging things, very carefully, very slowly, so that nothing looks obviously wrong but nothing is quite where you left it. I had trusted Donna with access to something private and personal. I had trusted her with the infrastructure of my financial life, and the possibility that she'd been using that access to quietly take from me, for months, possibly years, made me feel a kind of vertigo that I hadn't felt since Harold died. Because Harold had handled our finances together, when he was gone, I'd had to learn all of it myself, and I'd been grateful when Donna offered to help. I'd felt taken care of. I'd thought, this is what family does. Looking back, I wish I'd been more careful. I wish I'd trusted my own ability to figure things out without her help, but that thought wasn't useful to me right now. What was useful was figuring out the truth. Carol said to me, before you confront anyone, you need more information. You need the full picture. She looked at me steadily. Do you still have the login credentials for your online account? I do, I said. And you think she still has them? I don't know, I said. But she helped me set the password. She probably remembers it. Then you need to change everything, Carol said. Tonight, before she knows you're looking. I nodded. But there was one more thing I had to do first. I had to figure out what Tyler actually knew. Because here's what had been gnawing at me since the day Tyler confessed. He'd said his mom would have been upset if he'd asked me for money. He'd said it was complicated, and then immediately tried to walk it back. That meant Tyler knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. And he'd been used as a distraction. While I was focused on Tyler and the credit card charges, the GameStop receipts, the Wing Zone runs, Donna had been the one quietly moving money out of my savings through the online portal. Tyler's charges were almost a smokescreen. Whether intentional or not, I didn't know yet. But the timing lined up too well to be a coincidence. And I had to consider another possibility that I didn't want to consider. What if Tyler's charges had been encouraged by Donna specifically, so that if I noticed anything, my attention would go to him first? I changed my banking password that night. All of it. The login, the security questions, everything. I also called the bank back in the morning and asked them to add a verbal passcode to the account so that no changes could be made without it. Not online, not by phone, nothing. The young man on the phone, Chris again, walked me through it. He also quietly told me, and I think he was stretching protocol a little, but bless him, that if I suspected unauthorized access, I should request a full access log going back to when the account was opened, which I could do in writing at a branch. I did that the next day. While I waited for those records, Carol made some calls. She had an old professional contact. A woman named Patricia who had worked in financial compliance for years and was now semi-retired but occasionally consulted on private cases. Carol explained the situation in broad terms and asked if Patricia would take a look at what we had. Patricia agreed to meet with us that Friday. But before Friday arrived, something happened that changed the temperature of everything. Tyler called me on a Wednesday evening. His voice was low. He sounded like he was somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. "Grandma," he said, "I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have told you when we talked." I kept my voice calm. "Okay, Tyler, I'm listening." "The charges on your card," he said. "That was all me. I meant what I said. But," he stopped. A pause that stretched a little too long. "But what?" "My mom asked me to do it." I sat down, slowly. She asked you to use my card. She said it was a loan, Tyler said, and his voice cracked slightly. She said she'd pay it back, and it was just temporary, and you'd never even notice, because the amounts were small. She said it was. She said you'd offered before to help us out if we ever needed it, so it wasn't really wrong, it was more like you'd already said yes. The audacity of that made something go cold in my chest. I had never offered Donna a standing invitation to help herself to my credit card. How long ago did she ask you to do this? I said. About 2 months before the first charges. And did she help you get the card number? A very long pause. She already had it, he said quietly. She just told me what it was. I closed my eyes. Donna had my card number memorized, which meant she'd been using it, or preparing to use it, before she ever sent Tyler in with it. Tyler, I said, how much money do you think your mother has taken from me? Silence. I don't know all of it, he said. Not some of it, all of it. He knew there was more. Patricia met with Carol and me on Friday afternoon at Carol's dining room table. She was a small, no-nonsense woman in her mid-60s, with reading glasses on a chain and a legal pad that she wrote on constantly. I showed her everything I had, the transaction history I could access, the printout of the flagged charges, my notes from the phone call about the login history. Patricia read everything carefully without speaking. Then she asked me one question. How long ago did Donna set up your online banking? I told her. About 18 months. And you've given her no other financial access? She's not a signatory on any account? Not a beneficiary on anything you didn't intend? I said no. Patricia wrote something down. The transfer pattern you're describing, she said, tapping the circled amounts on the printout Carol had made. These are structured to stay below reporting thresholds. Small, irregular amounts, never the same number twice. That's not accidental. I hadn't known the term for it then, but I learned it that day. Structuring. When someone moves money in deliberately small increments to avoid triggering alerts, it's something banks are actually trained to look for. The problem is, it only gets flagged as suspicious when you're looking for it. Nobody had been looking for it in my account, because it was my account and I was just one older woman in Ohio who barely checked her balance online. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. When the full access log comes in from the bank, she said, I'd like to look at it with you. What you have here is suggestive. What the full log might show you is a timeline, and a timeline tells a story. The full log arrived 9 days later, certified mail. I brought it straight to Carol's house and we called Patricia. What the log showed us took nearly 2 hours to fully absorb. The first login from an unrecognized device happened 11 days after Donna helped me set up the account. 11 days. She hadn't even waited 2 weeks. The logins continued across 18 months. 41 flagged sessions in the last 12 months alone. Before the 12-month window, the bank could only show me a summary, but there were dozens more. And buried in the transfer history, transfers I'd never made, transfers so small and so carefully spaced, Patricia circled number after number and added them on her legal pad. When she turned the legal pad around and showed me the total, I had to read it twice. $7,214. $7,000. Over approximately 14 months. I remember the sound of Carol putting her hand over her mouth. I remember staring at that number and feeling a very strange kind of calm, the kind you feel when something is so big that your brain just goes quiet for a moment before the full weight of it lands. Then Patricia said, "There's something else you need to know." She had been looking at the access log more closely while I'd been absorbing the total. 3 weeks ago, recent enough that it had happened after I'd started noticing the credit card charges, after I'd started paying closer attention, there had been 5 logins in 7 days, each one longer than the previous sessions. "That's not someone checking balances," Patricia said. "That's someone who's working on something, possibly looking at what's there, possibly setting something up. The transfers I'd already found might not be the endgame. They might be the preparation for something larger." Patricia told me she wanted to talk to a colleague of hers, a man named Douglas who worked in financial fraud investigation, not to bring in authorities yet. Just to get a professional set of eyes on what we had and determine what my options were. I said yes. But I also knew I needed to talk to Robert. And that was the conversation I was most afraid of. Robert came over on a Sunday. I asked him to come alone, which confused him. He walked in looking slightly worried. I hadn't given him any context, and sat down across from me with a cup of coffee and waited. I told him everything. I watched his face as I talked. He didn't interrupt. He sat very still. And as I got deeper into the story, he went somewhere quiet behind his eyes, that I recognized as someone who is trying very hard not to have a reaction before they've understood everything. When I finished, he sat with it for a long moment. Then he said, "Martha, are you sure?" I said, "Robert, I'm sure." He looked at the table. $7,000. At minimum, I said. We don't know what the earlier history shows yet. He was quiet for so long that I almost reached over and touched his hand. Then he said, very slowly, "I need you to know something. Donna she's been talking about a trip recently. A long trip. She said she wanted to take Tyler somewhere for the summer, just the two of them. She asked me if I'd be okay on my own for a few weeks." I looked at him. "I thought she was just being spontaneous," he said. "When did she ask you that?" He thought about it. About 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, right when the intensive login sessions had started. The room felt very different suddenly. This wasn't just about money she'd already taken. She was planning something, and the 5 logins in 7 days weren't her reviewing the past. They were her preparing a next step. Douglas, Patricia's colleague, came to see us the following Thursday. He reviewed everything in under an hour. He was calm and methodical and didn't waste words. He said we had enough to file a police report and pursue this through civil channels. The unauthorized access to the account was a crime. The transfers, given the structuring pattern, would likely be treated seriously. But he said something else that made me pause. "If she's planning a larger move," he said, "you want to catch her in the act rather than before it. If she moves a significant amount of money and you can document the real-time attempt, it strengthens the case considerably." He looked at me and then at Robert. "That means letting her believe she still has access," he said, "for a short window, while you're watching." Robert didn't like that. He said he wanted to confront her directly. Douglas said that was his choice. But he said confronting her now, before we knew what she was planning next, risked her moving quickly, denying everything, and disappearing with whatever she had already taken before we could do anything about it. 3 weeks ago, she asked your husband if he'd be okay alone for the summer, Patricia said to me quietly. We all understood what that suggested. Robert went home that night looking like a man carrying something very heavy. I went to bed that night with the bank app open on my phone, set up with notifications for every transaction, every login, and then I waited. It took 11 days. On a Thursday evening, those Tuesday-Thursday evenings from the access log, my phone buzzed just after 9 o'clock. Login alert, unrecognized device. My hands were steady as I picked up the phone, more steady than I expected them to be. I called Patricia immediately. She said, "Don't do anything, just document. Screenshot everything the app shows you in real time. I'm calling Douglas." I sat in my kitchen in the dark. I hadn't turned a light on, which is strange to think about, but it felt right somehow, sitting in the dark watching my phone, and I watched the notification feed. The login lasted 22 minutes. During those 22 minutes, there was one attempted transfer to an external account I didn't recognize for $4,800. It failed. Because the bank's new security protocols, the ones I'd set up with Chris's help, required verbal confirmation of large transfers. The system had automatically blocked it and triggered an alert to my phone and a callback process. I got a call from the bank's fraud line within 4 minutes. I confirmed that I had not authorized the transfer. I told them I had reason to believe an unauthorized party had attempted it. They locked the account immediately. The session on the other end went dead. I sat there in the dark kitchen for a long time. $4,800, on top of what had already been taken. Almost $5,000 more in one attempt on a Thursday evening. I thought about Tyler, about how he'd called me and told me the truth. I thought about whether he'd known this was coming. Then I called Robert. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what had just happened. He said, "I'm coming over." He was at my door in 18 minutes. He looked like someone who had been trying very hard to hold something together and had just let go of it. He sat across from me and put his head in his hands for a moment, and I didn't say anything. I just let him be with it. Then he looked up and said, "I want to talk to her tonight. I want to confront her tonight." I said, "I think that's the right thing." Robert went home. I followed in my car. I was not going to sit at home while this happened. She needed to hear from me directly, and I think some part of Robert needed me there too. Donna was in the living room when we came in. She looked up from her phone. She looked at Robert's face first, and something shifted in her expression. Not fear exactly, but a kind of alertness, a recalibration. Then she looked at me, and I could see it, just for half a second. She understood why I was there. Robert sat down across from her. I sat beside him. He said, very quietly, "Donna, we need to talk about my mother's bank account." She didn't speak. "I need you to tell me the truth," Robert said. "And I need you to tell it once and completely, because I already know most of it." A long silence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Her voice was controlled. "Donna," Robert's voice didn't raise. It got quieter. "The bank has access logs. Martha has the transaction history. There's a fraud investigation that's been running for weeks. There was an attempted transfer tonight for nearly $5,000 that was blocked." Her chin lifted slightly. "I don't." "Tonight, Donna, 9 o'clock. From a device logged into her account, $4,700. Silence. "Why?" he said. And that was the question that broke through. Not the accusation, not the evidence, the why. She looked at me for a moment, then back at Robert. Something moved through her face, and I want to be honest, it wasn't the expression of someone who'd been caught in a simple crime. It was more complicated than that. It was the expression of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and was exhausted. She said, "I was leaving." Robert went very still. "I was leaving," she said again. "I had been planning it for a long time. I didn't want to have nothing when I left. I didn't want to be someone who had nothing." Robert asked, "Were you going to take Tyler?" She looked at the floor. I asked him. He told me no. There was something in that moment, the image of Tyler saying no to his mother about disappearing together, that made everything land differently. He'd called me. He'd told me the truth. He'd said no to leaving. Robert asked if Tyler had known about the money. She said he knew about the credit card. He didn't know about the transfers. She'd kept those separate. I believed her. I don't know why, but I believed her. Robert stood up. He said, "You need to get out of this house tonight." She didn't argue. She went upstairs. I heard doors and drawers. She came back down 40 minutes later with 2 bags. She didn't look at me on her way to the door. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. She looked back at Robert and said, "I'm sorry." He didn't respond. She left. I need to stop right there for a second, because I've had people ask me what they would have done in Robert's position. If you were sitting across from someone who had betrayed you that deeply, who had been quietly planning to disappear from your life while stealing from your mother, what would you have said? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Because Robert handled it with more dignity than I think most people could have managed. Okay, back to what happened next. Robert stayed at my house that night. We didn't talk much. We sat on the porch in the dark for a while and listened to the neighborhood. There's a certain kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, it's just the absence of what was there before, and that's what the night felt like. The following week we did 3 things. First, we filed a police report documenting the unauthorized account access and the attempted transfer. The detective we spoke with said the structuring pattern and the access logs made this a straightforward case for financial fraud charges. He said the civil recovery process would run alongside the criminal one. Second, Patricia connected us with a civil attorney named Howard, who had a gentle manner and a direct way of explaining what our options were. He said that given the documented total, which, once the bank's full historical records came in, reached just over $9,400, we had strong grounds for a civil suit to recover the full amount, plus damages. Third, I sat down with Tyler. That conversation was different from any of the others. Tyler came to my house knowing that I knew everything. He was quiet when he walked in, none of his usual ease. He sat down and folded his hands on the table the way someone does when they've rehearsed being honest. He said, "I want to pay back every dollar of what I used. I've got most of it saved." I looked at him for a long moment. "Why did you call me?" I asked. "That Wednesday night, why did you actually call?" He thought about that. "Because you're my grandmother," he said simply, "and she was wrong, and I knew she was wrong, and I couldn't keep being the person who let that happen." That answer stayed with me. He did pay me back. Over 3 months, in installments, he paid back every charge he'd made on that card. He didn't have to. Legally, the liability was on his mother. But he did it anyway, because he said it was the right thing to do. Donna's case moved through the system over the following months. She'd retained a lawyer. There were negotiations. She agreed to a civil settlement for the full amount and did not contest restitution. On the criminal side, she was charged with unauthorized computer access and financial fraud. Given no prior record and her cooperation, she received a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation. It wasn't a prison sentence. Some people thought it should have been heavier. I understood that. But for me, the justice I needed wasn't about the sentence. It was about having the truth out in the open. About not sitting at my kitchen table anymore thinking everything was fine when it wasn't. That part felt complete. Robert filed for divorce. He told me it wasn't only about the money, it was that he realized, sitting in that conversation, that he had never fully known his wife. That there were things going on right underneath him that he had been too trusting to see. He grieved that in his own way, and I tried to be there for him the way he'd always been there for me. Tyler moved into a small apartment near the college. He and Robert still had Sunday dinners. Sometimes he came to my house, and we sat on the porch and talked, and it felt not exactly like it used to, because it can't, not after something like this, but like something new and honest had been built in the space where the old thing had been. I think about that Tuesday morning sometimes, the coffee, the birds, the phone buzzing on the kitchen table, $62.47. I think about how easy it would have been to dismiss it completely. How many people would have? I was this close to putting the phone down and never pulling that thread at all. What I learned, and I don't mean this as a lesson exactly, more as something true, is that your instincts are usually right before your reason talks them out of it. That small buzzing feeling that something is off, trust it. Be gentle about how you follow it, because you might be wrong, but follow it. The other thing I learned is that betrayal from family doesn't have to define you. It can hollow you out for a while. It did hollow me out, honestly. There were mornings that first month where I sat at that kitchen table and felt nothing but tired and sad. But I also had Carol. I had Robert. I had Tyler, who in the end had chosen to do the right thing even when it cost him. And I had myself, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher in Ohio who figured out that her family had been lying to her and did something about it, and came out the other side standing. That felt like something worth keeping. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you, genuinely. I know this was a long one, and I know some parts of it were hard to sit with. They were hard to tell, too. If you've been through something similar, if someone you trusted used that trust against you, I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. Not because I want to dwell in the hard parts, but because I think there's something important about knowing that you're not alone in those experiences. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more stories coming, stories about family and secrets and what it costs to find the truth, and what you find on the other side of it. Drop a like if you stayed all the way through. It tells me this kind of storytelling matters, and it genuinely helps more than you know. Take care of yourselves, and trust your instincts. I'll see you in the next one.